The history of gaming as we know it could have been entirely different, all because of a little device known as the mod chip. This wasn't just a hack, it was a fundamental challenge to the very foundation of console gaming. And we're asking the question in today's episode, are these early mod chips brilliant acts of rebellion and innovation, or were they just simply acts of piracy that nearly destroyed the industry? These small hardware modifications would bypass copy protection, region locks, and other restrictions on optical disc-based systems, opening up the door to backups, imports, and homebrew. But they also fueled piracy and would trigger years of lawsuits from manufacturers. The earliest examples of the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube was where mod chip development really took off and defined the scene. And that scene has never died. In fact, it's thrived. While the methods these days are much more software-based, the goals have never changed. Launching in 1995, the PlayStation 1 would use standard CDs but with proprietary copy protection, with a physical wobble groove in the disc's inner hub. Inside this groove, a data stream containing security strings would be present. The PlayStation's BIOS would check for this twice during boot, and on any authentication failure to read these sectors, the drive motor would stop and the disc would not boot. But by 1996, mod chips would start to appear. Early commercial versions from Asia used the PIC 16C54 microcontroller in a modified 14-pin DIP package. They intercepted the wobble signal line and drove a gate line low to mute the real drive signal, and injected fake timed SCE strings via the data line. Installation was just 4 to 10 wires on the PS1 motherboard. But a pivotal moment would occur in 1997, when Scott Ryder, who went by the name Old Crow, would reverse engineer the same PIC 16C54 chip and ported it to Zilog Z8 and release it as open source assembly. This flooded the market with cheap PS1 mod chips. These chips weren't particularly sophisticated. They would essentially just spam these security sectors constantly. Sony was aware of this and started to introduce anti-piracy implementations. The very first kind was APv1, which appeared in the Japanese game Popo Rogue, but the more popular APv2 protection was first seen in the Japanese release of Dino Crisis, but would find its way in various PS1 games that spanned every region. This would trip up any non-stealth mod chip console. To counter this, stealth chips like the MM3 and the Mayumi V4 would emerge, decoding sub-Q data from the drive for timed injection only during checks. The PlayStation 2 would release in 2000. It was DVD-based, backward compatible, with IOP level checks for disk authenticity via anti-piracy disk patterns. It was also region locked. Early V1 to V4 models could be exploited using various swap tricks, that is, by booting legitimate media and then swapping during mid-load using open tray timing. In an effort to dissuade mod chip creation, Sony would offer Linux for the PlayStation 2, that effectively turned the hardware into a desktop computer that was powerful enough to program on. But this required expensive add-ons, including a hard drive, a keyboard, and installation software, all which was not cheap. PS2 Linux was also not readily available in most consumer electronics stores of the time. In late 2001, the FPGA-based Messiah chip was the first major no-swap chip for V3 to V6 PlayStation 2s. It would emulate unlock sequences and handle PS1, PS2, and DVD auto detection. If you held down the reset button in standby, you could access PS1 and DVD modes. Sony would sue, and production would halt, albeit temporarily. Messiah was the brains of Paul Owen, whose company Team Executor was only getting started in the scene. Later PS2 mod chips would emerge, including the Magic and Magic 3.1. These were 17 wires and stealth-based. The Matrix Infinity chip was the first upgradable via firmware. PS2 mod chips would unlock a massive homebrew ecosystem, including tools that are still very much a part of the homebrew ecosystem to this day, OPL, or the Open PS2 Loader. This would originally launch in 2009, as a seamless way to boot PS2 backups from various storage devices. The birth of the PS2 homebrew scene would also see retro emulators first appearing on consoles for the first time, including SNES 9X, FCE Ultra, and Gens. There were also various video CD and DVD media players. and free and open source PS2 Linux distributions were available. The Matrix Infinity had Dev 1 and Dev 2 modes, could directly boot ELF executables, enabling seamless application launches. It wasn't just all about piracy. The freedom to build your own applications on these closed source consoles would be a pivotal moment. The original Xbox in 2001 was PC-like, but had an encrypted x86 BIOS. Modchips would hijack the LPC bus. This would include the original 29-wire extender modchip. But it wouldn't be long before the entire contents of the BIOS could be decrypted, and an entirely new BIOS could be customized and flashed directly back onto the Xbox's motherboard. The Executor modchip would originally launch in 2002, with an easy installation on the LPC bus, and these modchips would innovate with optional LCD screens and custom Executor BIOSes. Custom dashboards would also release, including Unleash X, Avalanche, and XBMC. The Xbox hard drive could be unlocked for full access. And due to the x86 nature of the hardware, emulators could be ported easily from the PC, and the floodgates would soon open. Linux would also appear on the original Xbox. The Executor 3 and the Executor 3CE mod chips would advance, with onboard 512 kilobytes of flash for X3 Config Live OS. Homebrew would explode on the original Xbox. There was so much happening almost every day that an archive known as Xbins was established to maintain and curate all this software. It was mainly broken up into 4 main categories: dashboards including Evolution X, Unleash X, Avalanche, and others, with emulators such as MAME, SNES 9X, and file managers such as XB FileZilla, and of course there would be homebrew games and demos, and lastly, Xbox Linux. The Xbox homebrew scene pushed homebrew innovation far beyond piracy ever could. Nintendo's GameCube in 2001 would attempt to stop software piracy and modification by incorporating a custom mini 1.5GB DVD with a burst-cutting area and laser-etched serials. It also had a signed IPL or initial program loader in Mask ROM. Its debug port was also locked. But in 2004, the Viper GC was a IPL replacer, and it was just 4 wires overriding the Mask ROM. It also featured 128 kilobytes of flash and could boot into Homebrew. The Viper's file and menu browser would enable homebrews such as Swiss, the Swiss Army knife loader for SD and DVD-R games. Compared to the Xbox, the GameCube homebrew scene was limited, but it was still thriving. The GBI Game Boy interface and various emulators would appear, including file managers and homebrew apps. Later, the Xeno GC was a drive chip that would solder directly onto the drive motherboard, would patch firmware runtime for DVD and DVD-R read-writes, but sometimes would require tweaking for laser calibration. Xeno GC paired with Swiss was all you really needed for diskless SD loading of any games and any homebrew. The early mod chips embodied that hacker ethos: FPGA flexibility, open source code pushing boundaries, unlocking things like region-free and backups for game preservation and game dumping. It introduced emulators that were traditionally only available on your PC. They could now be enjoyed in your living room and entertainment center. And with media centers such as XBMC, it turned a closed console into an all-in-one entertainment and media device. Game loaders such as OPL and Swiss would easily dispatch console DRM and region restrictions. Yes, mod chips were inherently piracy devices, but they were also overwhelmingly innovative and sparked preservation and established communities. There's a famous story in 2006 where a Microsoft employee would bring in his modded Xbox to show Bill Gates, which was full of unauthorized software including Avalanche, XBMC, and various other tools. Instead of Bill Gates trying to stamp out the entire scene, he would instead say, "How can we engage this community?" This would go a long way to legitimize the Xbox modding scene at the time. Piracy would have its costs, but creativity would endure. The 3DS, Vita, and current Dreamcast scenes simply prove this. The DIY spirit and hacker culture really fostered a generation of tech enthusiasts, and the legacy of the cat and mouse game between the hardware makers and the enthusiasts really shaped modern console security, for better or for worse. But it's also led to some permanent change. Game consoles these days are region-free, and some of them have closed sandboxes where homebrew and emulators can be developed without disturbing the hardware's ecosystem. Modchips were more than just piracy devices. They fostered innovation, homebrew and emulation, enhanced performance and customizations, unlocking features of the hardware, and opening up a global playground. And it's fair to say that the video game landscape would look far different if it wasn't for these mod chips. But that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and we will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.